Settle in tonight as we explore why flying alongside history's greatest fighter ace would have been your last mission. You think you're ready for combat. You've trained for months, mastered your aircraft, and convinced yourself you have what it takes. But when they tell you you'll be flying wing for Erich Hartmann, something cold settles in your stomach that has nothing to do with fear and everything to do with certainty. The morning mist clings to the airfield at Proskurov as you walk toward your Messerschmitt Bf 109. It's October 1943, and the Eastern Front has become a meat grinder that devours pilots faster than the training schools can replace them. You're 22 years old, fresh from flight school, and about to discover why most wingmen assigned to Hartmann don't survive their first week. Hartmann emerges from the briefing hut, and your first impression isn't what you expected. He's barely older than you, 21, with boyish features and an almost casual demeanor that seems out of place among the hardened veterans. But there's something in his pale blue eyes, a calculating stillness that makes veteran pilots step aside when he passes. "So you're my new wingman," he says, extending a hand. His grip is firm but not crushing. "Tell me, have you ever killed a man?" The question catches you off guard. Most pilots discuss tactics, aircraft specifications, weather conditions. Hartmann wants to know if you've crossed that invisible line that separates you from the enemy forever. "Not yet, sir," you reply, trying to keep your voice steady. He nods, studying your face with an intensity that makes you uncomfortable. "Good. That means you still have time to learn the most important lesson. Staying alive isn't about being the best pilot. It's about being the smartest hunter." But what he doesn't tell you, what you won't understand until it's too late, is that hunting with Erich Hartmann means accepting that you're not just bait. You're expendable ammunition in a game where only one player matters. The aircraft assigned to you is a Bf 109G6, a machine that demands respect and punishes carelessness with death. As you perform your pre-flight inspection, you notice Hartmann's approach to his own aircraft. Where other pilots rush through routine checks, eager to get airborne, Hartmann examines every rivet, every control surface, every gauge with methodical precision. "Your life depends on this machine," he explains, watching you fumble with your harness straps. "But more importantly, my life depends on your machine performing exactly as expected. If your engine fails at the wrong moment, if your guns jam when I need covering fire, if you make one mistake in formation." He doesn't finish the sentence. He doesn't need to. The morning briefing reveals your first mission together, a free hunt over Soviet-controlled territory near Poltava. Intelligence reports suggest a large formation of Ilyushin IL-2 Sturmovix escorted by Yak fighters will be attacking German ground positions around noon. Your job is simple in theory: follow Hartmann, watch for threats, and try not to get in his way. Remember, the squadron commander emphasizes, Hartmann has 87 confirmed kills. He knows what he's doing. Your job is to learn from him and stay alive long enough to be useful. 87 kills. The number seems impossible. Most pilots are lucky to survive long enough to claim 5 victories. Hartmann has shot down more aircraft than some entire squadrons. As you taxi toward the runway, your hands tremble slightly on the controls. It's not fear of dying. Every pilot learns to live with that possibility. It's the growing realization that flying with Hartmann means accepting that your survival is secondary to his success. The takeoff is routine until you're airborne and forming up on Hartmann's wing. Immediately, you notice his flying style is unlike anything they taught in flight school. Where instructors emphasized smooth, predictable movements, Hartmann flies with subtle aggression, constantly adjusting altitude, speed, and heading in small increments that keep potential enemies guessing about his intentions. "Stay tight," his voice crackles through your radio. "But not too tight. If I brake left hard, you brake right. If I dive, you climb and cover my retreat. And whatever you do, don't try to be a hero." The autumn landscape below seems peaceful from 8,000 meters. Harvested fields stretch toward the horizon, interrupted by small villages and the occasional road. It's hard to believe that somewhere beneath those clouds, men are killing each other with mechanical precision. 30 minutes into the patrol, Hartmann's voice cuts through the radio static. 2 o'clock low. For Sturmovix with escort. You squint through your canopy, searching the sky. At first, you see nothing but empty blue and scattered clouds. Then, gradually, tiny specks resolve themselves into aircraft formations. The Sturmovix are flying in a loose diamond pattern, with 6 Yak fighters weaving above them in protective sweeps. How did you spot them so quickly, you ask, genuinely amazed. Experience, Hartmann replies. And the understanding that in this business, the pilot who sees first usually goes home. The pilot who sees second usually goes down. But here's what you don't realize yet. Hartmann didn't just spot the enemy formation by chance. He's been studying intelligence reports, weather patterns, and Soviet tactical doctrine for weeks. He knows their patrol routes, their timing, their preferred altitudes. This isn't luck, it's calculated predation. We're going to attack from the sun, Hartmann announces, banking gradually to position your formation. I'll take the lead, Sturmovik. You watch for the escorts and call out any threats. Do not, repeat, do not, attempt to engage unless I'm in immediate danger. The approach takes 15 minutes of careful maneuvering. Hartmann uses every cloud, every shadow, every advantage the sky provides to position your formation perfectly. You begin to understand why he survived so long. He fights like a chess master, thinking 3 moves ahead while his opponents are still reacting to his last gambit. Remember, his voice is calm, almost conversational. Speed is life. Altitude is life insurance. But patience is what keeps you alive long enough to spend both. As you dive toward the Soviet formation, the world transforms into a tunnel of focused violence. The Sturmovix grow from specks to recognizable aircraft to individual targets in seconds. Hartmann's Messerschmitt seems to float effortlessly into firing position behind the lead aircraft, while you struggle to maintain formation in the increasingly turbulent air. The first burst from Hartmann's guns is textbook perfect, a 2-second burst that tears through the Sturmovix engine cowling and cockpit. The aircraft doesn't explode dramatically like in the movies. It simply shudders, rolls onto its back, and begins a lazy spiral toward the earth below. 1 kill. 88 total, but the dance has just begun, and you're about to discover why most pilots assigned to fly with Hartmann don't survive long enough to learn from their mistakes. Yaks coming down from 2 o'clock, you shout into your radio, spotting the Soviet fighters diving toward your position. They're fast, aggressive, and clearly experienced. This isn't going to be the easy victory you'd imagine. Hartmann's response is immediate and violent. Instead of turning to meet the attacking fighters head-on, he banks sharply left and dives, forcing you to follow while the Soviet pilots adjust their intercept course. It's a classic deflection shot scenario, except Hartmann is turning the tables, using their aggression against them. Stay with me, he orders, his Messerschmitt pulling GS that make your vision gray at the edges. But be ready to break on my command. The lead Yak opens fire too early, its bullets streaming harmlessly behind your aircraft. But the second fighter is more patient, more experienced. You watch tracer rounds reach out toward Hartmann's machine like deadly fingers, some passing so close to his wing that you expect to see metal fragments. This is the moment you realize the fundamental difference between training and combat. In flight school, mistakes mean extra laps around the pattern. Here, mistakes mean death, and there's no instructor to save you when things go wrong. Hartmann's counterattack is swift and merciless. He reverses his turn, bleeding speed perfectly to force the pursuing Yak to overshoot. For 3 seconds, the Soviet fighter hangs helplessly in front of his guns. Hartmann doesn't waste the opportunity. The cannon shells tear through the Yak's fuselage like a buzz saw through cardboard. The aircraft breaks apart in midair, pieces spinning away in different directions while the pilot's parachute blossoms white against the blue sky. 2 kills. 89 total, but you're so focused on watching Hartmann's masterwork that you almost miss the third Yak positioning itself on your tail. The first indication of danger is the sound of bullets tearing through your aircraft's wing, followed immediately by the acrid smell of burning metal. Brake right. Brake right now. Hartmann's voice explodes through your headphones. You throw the stick hard over, pulling GS that threaten to tear your consciousness away. The world spins, blues and browns mixing into a nauseating blur while your aircraft shudders under forces it was never designed to handle. When your vision clears, you're alone in empty sky. No Hartmann. No Soviet fighters. Just silence and the steady drone of your damaged engine. This is the moment every wingman fears, separation from your leader in hostile territory with a damaged aircraft and no clear idea of your position. But as you're about to discover, being alone with Erich Hartmann is often more dangerous than being alone with the enemy. Where are you? Hartmann's voice crackles through the static. Calm despite the circumstances, you check your instruments, trying to determine your heading while scanning the sky for threats. The compass is spinning uselessly, probably damaged when those bullets tore through your wing. The engine temperature is climbing into the red zone, and there's a vibration in the controls that suggests structural damage. I think I'm southeast of the initial contact point, you reply, hoping you sound more confident than you feel. My engine is running rough, and I've got damage to the port wing. Can you make it back to base? You consider lying, but the evidence is written in smoke trailing from your engine and the way your aircraft wants to roll left despite your best efforts to maintain level flight. I don't think so. There's a pause. When Hartmann speaks again, his tone has changed subtly. It's still professional, but there's something else underneath, a calculation that makes your blood run cold. Listen carefully, he says. I'm going to give you a heading that will take you toward our lines. Fly as low as you can without stalling. If you see any Soviet aircraft, don't try to fight. Dive for the ground and try to crash land near German positions. What about you? Another pause. Longer this time. I'm going to continue hunting. There are still 3 Sturmovic's out there, and they haven't completed their mission yet. The realization hits you like a physical blow. Hartmann is abandoning you. Not because he's cowardly, but because saving one damaged aircraft is less important than completing the mission. You're expendable. The mission is not, but here's what you don't understand yet. This moment, right now, alone in a damaged aircraft over enemy territory, this is where you'll discover what kind of pilot you really are. And more importantly, whether you have what it takes to survive in Erich Hartmann's world. The flight back toward German lines becomes a masterclass in survival flying. Every minute brings new challenges: Soviet anti-aircraft fire from ground positions, the constant threat of fighter interception, and your aircraft's increasing mechanical problems. The engine temperature gauge has moved well into the red zone, and there's a new sound, a metallic grinding that suggests internal damage. You reduce throttle settings, trading speed for engine life, hoping to stretch your fuel and mechanical endurance long enough to reach friendly territory. 20 minutes into the solo flight, you spot them, 4 Yakovlev fighters in loose formation, flying a parallel course about 2 kilometers to your north. They haven't seen you yet, but that's only because you're flying barely 100 meters above the ground, using terrain features to mask your presence. This is the kind of situation Hartmann prepared you for, though you didn't realize it at the time. Always assume you're being hunted, he'd said during one of his few instructional moments. The moment you relax, the moment you assume you're safe, that's when the enemy will find you. You reduce throttle further, hoping to minimize your smoke trail while gradually turning south toward what you hope are German positions. The damaged wing makes every control input an adventure, and you're constantly fighting to maintain level flight. The Soviet fighters maintain their course for several minutes before one of them banks sharply in your direction. Your heart stops. Have they spotted you? Are they beginning an intercept run? No. They're investigating something else, probably another aircraft or ground target. But the moment serves as a reminder: you're alone, damaged, and flying through airspace where Soviet fighters have every advantage. The landscape below begins to look familiar, though you can't pinpoint exactly why. There's a river running east-west, with what appears to be a damaged bridge. Several destroyed vehicles dot a road that disappears into a cluster of small buildings. Then you see them, muzzle flashes from German positions engaging Soviet ground forces. You've found the front lines, but determining which side is which becomes crucial. Landing behind enemy lines in a German aircraft would be a death sentence, but as you prepare to identify friendly positions, your engine makes a new sound, a catastrophic banging that signals imminent failure. White smoke begins pouring from the engine cowling, and your airspeed drops rapidly despite full throttle. This is it. You're going down whether you want to or not. The question isn't whether you'll survive the crash landing, though that's certainly in doubt. The question is whether flying with Erich Hartmann has taught you enough about survival to make it through whatever comes next. Emergency landing procedures flash through your mind as you search for suitable terrain. The ground below is a patchwork of fields, roads, and scattered buildings, with German and Soviet forces engaged in running battles across the landscape. You spot what appears to be a harvested grain field, relatively flat and free of obvious obstacles. It's your best option, though best is a relative term when your aircraft is on fire and you're gliding at barely above stall speed. The Messerschmitt hits hard, harder than any landing you've ever experienced. The impact drives your spine into your seat while the aircraft bounces, skips, and finally grinds to a stop in a shower of dirt and torn metal. For a moment, you sit stunned, checking for injuries while smoke pours from the engine compartment. Nothing seems broken, though everything hurts. More importantly, the aircraft isn't burning yet, which gives you time to escape before the fuel tanks explode. You unbuckle your harness, pop the canopy, and roll out onto the wing, dropping to the ground and running away from the wreckage. 50 meters seems like a safe distance until you remember that crashed aircraft tend to attract attention, exactly the kind of attention you want to avoid in contested territory. The sound of approaching engines makes your blood freeze. Motorcycles, coming fast from the direction of the village. But are they German or Soviet? You have perhaps 30 seconds to decide. Run and hope to evade whoever's coming, or stand your ground and hope they're friendly. Either choice could be fatal. This is where Hartmann's training becomes crucial, though he never explicitly taught it. Always have an escape route, he'd mentioned casually. Even on the ground. You choose to run, sprinting toward a line of trees that offers concealment. Behind you, the motorcycles reach your crashed aircraft. Voices shout in a language you can't identify at this distance. In the tree line, you pause to catch your breath and assess the situation. Through the branches, you can see soldiers examining your Messerschmitt. Their helmets and equipment look German, but you can't be certain from this distance. The decision to reveal yourself or remain hidden will determine whether you rejoin Hartmann's squadron or spend the rest of the war in a prisoner camp. But as you're weighing your options, a new sound reaches your ears: aircraft engines, approaching fast and low. Looking up through the canopy, you see a formation of Sturmovix heading directly toward the German positions. The same aircraft Hartmann was hunting when you became separated, and somewhere above them, almost invisible against the blue sky, a single Messerschmitt is positioning itself for an attack run. Hartmann hasn't given up the hunt. While you were crash landing and running from enemy forces, he continued the mission, stalking the remaining Soviet ground attack aircraft with mechanical patience. But watching him work from the ground gives you a new perspective on his methods, and a disturbing realization about why so many of his wingmen don't survive. From your concealed position, you have a perfect view of what makes Erich Hartmann the most dangerous fighter pilot of the war. The Sturmovix are flying in loose formation, focused on their ground attack mission and trusting their escort fighters to provide protection, but their escorts are elsewhere, probably chasing phantoms or investigating other threats. Hartmann has isolated his prey perfectly, using timing and patience to create an engagement on his terms. The attack develops with mathematical precision. Hartmann positions himself in the sun, approaches from the blind spot of the rearmost Sturmovik, and opens fire at minimum range for maximum effect. The Soviet aircraft doesn't stand a chance. Hartmann's cannon shells tear through its armored cockpit and engine compartment in a concentrated burst that lasts barely 2 seconds. The Sturmovik rolls inverted and impacts the ground with a tremendous explosion that sends smoke and debris high into the air. 3 kills today. 90 total, but instead of breaking off and heading for home, Hartmann repositions for another attack. The remaining Sturmoviks are alerted now, turning and diving for the protection of the ground-based anti-aircraft guns, but Hartmann follows them down with predatory patience. This is what you're beginning to understand. Hartmann doesn't just hunt enemy aircraft. He hunts them with an intensity that borders on obsession. Each kill feeds a need that goes beyond duty or patriotism. It's personal. The second Sturmovik dies 5 minutes later, victim of a perfect deflection shot as it attempts to escape at low altitude. The aircraft breaks apart in midair, pieces spinning earthward while its pilot struggles to escape the wreckage. 4 kills today. 91 total. The final Sturmovik manages to reach the protection of Soviet anti-aircraft positions, but Hartmann doesn't give up. He circles at maximum range, waiting for an opportunity, studying the enemy's movements with the patience of a cat watching a mouse hole. From the ground, you can see muzzle flashes as Soviet gunners try to drive him away. Shells burst around his aircraft, creating black puffs of smoke that seem impossibly close. Any sane pilot would break off the attack and head for home, but Erich Hartmann isn't any pilot, and you're beginning to understand that sanity might be incompatible with his level of success. The opportunity comes when the Sturmovik pilot makes a mistake, turning too sharply while trying to evade. He stalls his aircraft momentarily. For 3 seconds, he hangs motionless in Hartmann's crosshairs. That's all the time Hartmann needs. 5 kills today. 92 total. But as you watch him climb away from the burning wreckage, heading back toward German lines, you realize something that chills you to the bone. Throughout the entire engagement, Hartmann never once checked on your status. Never searched for your crash site. Never attempted to coordinate rescue efforts. You were completely forgotten the moment you became tactically irrelevant. This is why you wouldn't survive flying with Erich Hartmann. Not because he's reckless or incompetent, but because he's so focused on killing that everything else, including the survival of his wingmen, becomes secondary to the hunt. The German soldiers who found your crash site turn out to be a reconnaissance patrol returning from a forward observation post. They're tired, nervous, and initially suspicious of your story, but your Luftwaffe identification and obvious crash injuries eventually convince them you're legitimate. You're lucky, the patrol leader explains as they share their rations. Ivan's been pushing hard all morning. Another hour and this whole area would have been behind enemy lines. As evening falls, you hitch a ride back to your airfield on a supply truck carrying ammunition and medical supplies to forward positions. The journey takes 3 hours over roads cratered by artillery and littered with the debris of recent fighting. When you finally reach the squadron area, you discover that Hartmann returned 4 hours ago, reported 5 confirmed kills, and has already been debriefed by intelligence officers. He's in the officers' mess, sharing a quiet meal with another pilot. His greeting is matter of fact. "I see you made it back. Good. We have another mission tomorrow morning. No questions about your crash landing. No concern for your injuries. No acknowledgement that you spent the afternoon evading enemy forces while he continued hunting. I thought you might search for me," you say, trying to keep accusation out of your voice. Hartmann looks up from his meal, those pale blue eyes studying you with clinical interest. "Why? You were either dead or captured, in which case searching would accomplish nothing, or you were capable of making it back on your own, in which case searching was unnecessary. But what if I'd been wounded? What if I'd needed help? Then you would have died," he replies calmly. Just like every other pilot who gets separated from his formation in combat. This isn't flight school. There are no instructors coming to rescue you when you make mistakes. The conversation dies there. Around the mess hall, other pilots continue their quiet discussions about missions, aircraft maintenance, and home. But you sit in silence, processing what you've learned about the man who has become legend. Erich Hartmann isn't just a skilled pilot. He's something else entirely, a perfectionist who has eliminated every emotion, every hesitation, every human weakness that might interfere with his ability to kill enemy aircraft, and that's exactly why flying with him is ultimately a death sentence. Over the following weeks, you fly 17 more missions with Hartmann. Each one follows the same pattern: methodical preparation, patient stalking, sudden violence, and clinical efficiency. You watch him accumulate kills with mechanical precision, sometimes 3 or 4 per mission, while you struggle simply to stay alive. Your role as wingman becomes increasingly clear. You're not there to participate in combat. You're there to provide early warning of threats, to serve as bait when necessary, and to witness Hartmann's growing legend. Your survival is useful but not essential. The other pilots in the squadron begin to avoid you, not from personal dislike but from superstition. Hartmann's wingmen have developed a reputation for short careers and violent ends. You're the exception that proves the rule, and your continued survival makes others nervous. How do you do it? Asks Klaus, a new pilot assigned to fly with one of the other aces. How do you stay alive flying with him? The question haunts you because you don't have a good answer. You've survived not through skill or courage, but through a combination of luck, caution, and the gradual understanding that your job isn't to fight, it's to survive. Hartmann's kill count continues climbing, 95, 100, 110. Each victory is recorded in the squadron logbook with mathematical precision, but the man himself remains unchanged. If anything, success has made him more focused, more driven, more relentlessly efficient. During one mission over the Dnieper River, you witness something that finally explains the source of his obsession. A formation of Soviet bombers is attacking German positions, protected by a screen of experienced fighter pilots flying Lavochkin La-5s. Most aces would evaluate the tactical situation, identify the weakest target, and attempt a quick strike before withdrawing to safety. Hartmann does something different. He studies the enemy formation for 20 minutes, noting every movement, every tactical decision, every weakness in their defensive screen. He's not just hunting, you realize with growing horror. He's learning how they think. When Hartmann finally attacks, it's with knowledge gained through patient observation. He knows which pilot will break left under pressure, which one tends to climb when threatened, which one flies slightly out of position. He's not just shooting down aircraft, he's shooting down individual humans whose behavioral patterns he's memorized. The engagement lasts 8 minutes. 4 Soviet aircraft are destroyed, including 2 of their most experienced pilots. Hartmann returns to base with ammunition to spare and fuel for another hour of combat. That evening, he spends 3 hours reviewing intelligence reports on Soviet fighter tactics, making notes in a private logbook that he never allows anyone else to see. What's in there? You ask during a rare moment of casual conversation. Everything, he replies without looking up. Every pilot I've fought. Every aircraft I've shot down. Every mistake they made that got them killed. The logbook contains more than just statistics. It's a catalog of human failure, a reference guide to the fatal errors that enemy pilots make in combat. Hartmann has turned warfare into a science, with himself as the perfect predator and everyone else, enemy and ally alike, as subjects for study. This is the final piece of the puzzle. You understand now why wingmen don't survive flying with Erich Hartmann. He doesn't see you as a person. You're a tactical asset, valuable only as long as you serve his purposes. The moment you become a liability, damaged, separated, or simply unlucky, you cease to exist in his calculations. But the most disturbing realization comes later, as you lie in your bunk listening to the distant sound of artillery. You've begun thinking the same way. After months of flying with him, you've started evaluating every situation through the lens of tactical advantage, calculating the odds of survival, mentally cataloging the weaknesses you observe in other pilots. Erich Hartmann isn't just the most dangerous fighter pilot of the war. He's a contagion, a way of thinking that transforms everyone around him into something less than human, and that's why you wouldn't survive flying with him. Not because he'd get you killed, but because surviving in his world requires becoming someone you wouldn't recognize in a mirror. The final mission comes in November 1943, during the desperate fighting around Kiev. Soviet forces are pushing westward with overwhelming numerical superiority, and the Luftwaffe is throwing every available aircraft into combat in an attempt to slow their advance. You're assigned to a 4-ship formation led by Hartmann, with orders to interdict Soviet ground forces advancing along the main road toward the city. Intelligence reports suggest heavy truck columns protected by self-propelled anti-aircraft guns and fighter patrols. During the pre-flight briefing, Hartmann studies aerial photographs with his usual methodical precision. But there's something different in his demeanor, a tension you haven't seen before. His kill count has reached 147, putting him within striking distance of becoming the highest-scoring fighter ace of all time. The record is 158, he explains to the formation. Gerhard Barkhorn holds it currently. I intend to break that record before Christmas. The statement sends a chill through the other pilots. Not because of the ambition, every fighter pilot dreams of achieving ace status, but because of the clinical way he discusses other men's deaths as stepping stones to personal glory, the mission begins routinely. You form up on Hartmann's wing while the other two aircraft take positions as high cover. The flight toward the target area passes without incident, though radio intercepts suggest heavy Soviet fighter activity in the region. When you reach the assigned patrol area, the landscape below is chaos. Convoys of trucks and armored vehicles stretch for kilometers along the main road, while artillery exchanges send columns of smoke rising into the clear morning air. Target-rich environment, Hartmann observes with satisfaction. We'll work the road from north to south. I want minimum engagement time, hit hard and break off before their fighters can respond. The first pass is textbook perfect. Hartmann dives on a column of fuel trucks, his cannon fire igniting a series of explosions that send black smoke towering into the sky. You provide cover, scanning for threats while he lines up his next target, but something goes wrong. Instead of breaking off as planned, Hartmann continues his attack run, pursuing damaged vehicles with single-minded focus. He's so intent on maximizing his destruction that he ignores the tactical situation developing around him. Fighters, screams the high-cover pilot. Yaks coming down from the east. You count them as they dive toward your formation, 8 Yakovlev Yak-9s in 2 flights, perfectly positioned to catch you at low altitude while you're focused on ground targets. It's a classic bounce, and you're flying directly into it. Break off, you radio to Hartmann. We need altitude. But he doesn't respond. He's locked onto another target, completely absorbed in the mechanics of destruction. This is the moment you've been dreading for months. Hartmann's obsession with killing has overridden his tactical judgment. The Soviet fighters arrive with devastating effect. The first burst tears through your port wing, sending metal fragments spinning past your canopy. The second burst destroys your radio and fills the cockpit with acrid smoke. You brake hard right, pulling GS that threatened to tear your consciousness away, but the Yak pilot follows every move with practiced ease. He's experienced, patient, and knows exactly how to use his aircraft's advantages. This is it. After months of flying with the most successful fighter pilot in history, you're about to die because he couldn't resist pursuing one more target. The irony is perfect and terrible. Erich Hartmann's greatest weakness isn't lack of skill or courage. It's his inability to recognize when hunting becomes more important than surviving. But as cannon shells tear through your aircraft's fuselage and engine, you realize something that gives you a final moment of bitter satisfaction. You've learned his lesson too well. You become exactly like him, so focused on the immediate tactical situation that you've lost sight of the bigger picture. The aircraft begins its final dive toward the Ukrainian countryside, carrying with it the answer to why you wouldn't survive flying with Erich Hartmann, because success in his world requires sacrificing everything human about yourself, and the cost of that sacrifice is ultimately higher than the price of failure. Your Messerschmitt hits the ground at 200 kilometers per hour, cartwheeling through a harvested field in a shower of dirt, metal, and flame. The impact drives consciousness from your mind like a hammer blow, and for an indeterminate time, you exist in a void where pain and awareness merge into something beyond normal sensation. When awareness returns, you're hanging upside down in your cockpit harness, blood dripping from your forehead onto the shattered instrument panel. The aircraft is burning, but slowly, more smoke than flame, which gives you precious seconds to escape. Every movement is agony. Your left shoulder is dislocated, possibly broken. Your ribs feel like broken glass grinding against each other. But you're alive, which is more than you expected 30 seconds ago. You manage to release your harness and drop onto the inverted canopy, then crawl through the twisted metal framework that used to be your aircraft. Each movement brings new waves of pain, but the alternative is burning to death in the wreckage. 20 meters from the crash site, you collapse in the mud and look back at what remains of your Messerschmitt. It's barely recognizable as an aircraft, more like abstract sculpture created by high-speed collision with solid earth. The sound of approaching engines makes you look up. Through the haze of pain and smoke, you see a single aircraft circling overhead. Even at this distance, you recognize the distinctive silhouette and markings. Hartmann. He's found you, just as he found his ground targets and his aerial victims. But instead of landing to provide assistance, instead of calling for rescue or medical support, he simply continues his orbit, observing the crash site with clinical detachment. For 5 minutes, he circles overhead while you lie bleeding in the mud. Then his aircraft banks away toward the west, leaving you alone with your injuries and the growing realization that you were never anything more than a tactical asset to be discarded when damaged. This is the final lesson in why you wouldn't survive flying with Erich Hartmann, even if you somehow managed to live through the combat missions, the mechanical failures, and the tactical disasters that inevitably follow his single-minded pursuit of kills. You would ultimately discover that your survival never mattered to him at all. You're found 6 hours later by a German medical patrol. Your injuries are severe but not fatal: dislocated shoulder, 3 broken ribs, concussion, and assorted lacerations that will leave permanent scars. But you'll live, which puts you in a very exclusive category among pilots who have flown extended missions with Hartmann. During your recovery in a field hospital, you learn that Hartmann returned to base and reported the mission as a tactical success: 4 ground vehicles destroyed, 2 enemy fighters damaged, 1 friendly aircraft lost due to mechanical failure. Mechanical failure. He never mentioned the tactical error that led to your shoot-down. Never acknowledged the poor decision-making that got you separated from the formation. In his official report, you simply disappeared due to aircraft malfunction, another statistic in the larger war effort. But 3 days later, intelligence reports confirmed that Hartmann scored his 150th kill during the same mission, shooting down a Soviet fighter while you were crash landing in that Ukrainian field. The news reaches you through whispered conversations among hospital staff and recovering aircrew. Hartmann has become the highest-scoring fighter ace in history, surpassing all previous records with mathematical precision. Your injuries have ended your flying career. Broken ribs don't heal properly when they're compressed by G-forces, and your concussion symptoms suggest brain trauma that makes high-altitude flight dangerous. You'll finish the war in administrative positions, filing reports and managing supply inventories while other men fight and die in the skies above Europe. But as you lie in your hospital bed, listening to the distant sound of aircraft engines and artillery fire, you realize that you've received something more valuable than medals or glory. You've learned why Erich Hartmann became the most successful fighter pilot in history, and more importantly, why that success came at a cost that no sane person should be willing to pay. He achieved his record by reducing warfare to pure mathematics, eliminating every human consideration that might interfere with efficient killing. Compassion, loyalty, friendship, these became tactical disadvantages to be discarded in pursuit of higher kill counts. Your survival was an anomaly, a statistical outlier that proves the rule rather than challenging it. Most of Hartmann's wingmen died because they tried to emulate his methods without possessing his unique combination of skill, luck, and emotional detachment. But you survived by learning a different lesson. Sometimes the most important victory is recognizing when the cost of winning is higher than the value of success. Years later, after the war has ended and Hartmann has become a prisoner of the Soviets, you'll read about his final record: 352 confirmed aerial victories. The highest total achieved by any fighter pilot in history. The newspapers will call him a hero, a legend, an example of German military excellence. They'll never mention the wingman who died flying beside him, the tactical decisions that prioritized kills over survival, or the gradual transformation from human being to killing machine that made his success possible. But you'll remember the pale blue eyes that evaluated every situation through the lens of tactical advantage. You'll remember the clinical detachment that allowed him to abandon damaged wingmen without a second thought. You'll remember the obsession that ultimately became more important than any human consideration, and you'll know why you wouldn't survive flying with Erich Hartmann, because survival in his world required becoming something that was no longer recognizably human. The choice was never between life and death, it was between existing as a person or functioning as a weapon. Most of his wingmen chose wrong. You chose to remain human, and that choice saved your life in ways that have nothing to do with combat or aircraft or warfare. The war ended. Hartmann went to prison. You went home, and in the quiet moments before sleep, when the sound of aircraft engines echoes in your memory, you know that you made the right choice, even if it means you'll never be remembered as a hero, even if it means your survival story will never be told in the history books, even if it means accepting that sometimes the greatest victory is simply remaining yourself in a world that demands you become something else. You survived flying with Erich Hartmann not because you were a better pilot, but because you recognized that there are things more important than winning, and that recognition, more than any medal or commendation, is what allowed you to come home from the war with your humanity intact. But the story doesn't end with your crash and recovery. Because to truly understand why you wouldn't survive flying with Erich Hartmann, you need to know what happened to the others, the wingmen who came before you and the ones who came after. During your weeks in the hospital, you begin collecting their stories. Not officially, there are no formal records of wingman casualties, no statistics tracking the survival rates of pilots assigned to fly with aces. But in the quiet conversations between recovering aircrew, in the whispered exchanges during shift changes, in the careful silences that follow certain names, you piece together a pattern that chills you to the bone. Werner Bartz, 20 years old, from Bavaria, flew 3 missions with Hartmann before disappearing during a patrol over the Dnieper River. Official cause: aircraft mechanical failure. Unofficial truth: separated from formation during combat, never seen again. Klaus Mertens, 19 years old, veteran of flight training school. Assigned to Hartmann's wing in September 1943. Survived exactly 11 days. Shot down while providing cover during one of Hartmann's hunting expeditions. Rescued by German ground forces, but died of his injuries before reaching medical care. Hans Dobrik, 22 years old, previously flew bomber missions over England. Transferred to fighters at his own request, specifically asked to fly with Hartmann to learn from the best. Killed during his second mission when Soviet fighters caught him alone after Hartmann had already broken off to pursue another target. Friedrich Korner, 21 years old, son of a Luftwaffe officer. Flew 7 missions with Hartmann, showing real promise as a pilot. Died when his aircraft suffered engine failure during a low-altitude strafing run, a mission profile Hartmann favored because it maximized kill opportunities but left wingmen vulnerable to ground fire. Each story follows the same pattern: promising young pilots, eager to learn from Germany's most successful ace, gradually realizing that their role wasn't to participate in combat but to serve as tactical accessories in Hartmann's private war against the Soviet Air Force. But the most disturbing story comes from Helmut Lipfert, a veteran pilot recovering from burns suffered when his aircraft caught fire during combat. Lipfert had flown with several of Germany's top aces, including Gerhard Barkhorn and Walter Nauetny. His perspective on Hartmann chills you more than any combat story. "I flew wing for Barkhorn 12 times, Lipfert tells you during one of the long hospital nights. Dangerous missions, but Barkhorn always looked out for his wingmen. Made sure we were in position to cover each other, always had escape routes planned. Lost 2 wingmen in 6 months, but considering the tactical situation, that was actually good." He pauses, adjusting the bandages on his hands with practiced care. "Then I flew 3 missions with Hartmann. Just 3. And I realized something that made me request a transfer. Barkhorn was a fighter pilot who happened to be very good at killing enemy aircraft. Hartmann is something else entirely. He's a killer who happens to fly fighter planes. What's the difference?" Lipfert looks at you with eyes that have seen too much. "Barkhorn fought to protect Germany, to keep enemy bombers away from our cities, to support our ground forces. His kills served a larger purpose. Hartmann kills because he enjoys killing. The war, the politics, the strategic objectives, those are just excuses that allow him to do what he was born to do." The conversation haunts you because it explains something you'd observed but never articulated: Hartmann's peculiar calm during combat, the way he studied his victims before attacking, the methodical precision with which he approached each kill. How many wingmen has he lost, you ask? Officially? Hard to say, because the records don't track that statistic. Unofficially? Lipfert is quiet for a long moment. "I heard someone in squadron operations mention that Hartmann has been assigned 37 different wingmen since he started flying combat missions. You're number 37. 37 wingmen. Even accounting for transfers, promotions, and non-combat casualties, the mathematics are stark. Flying with Erich Hartmann is statistically more dangerous than flying alone, but the most chilling detail comes next. The truly scary part," Lipfert continues, "is that Hartmann doesn't seem to remember their names. I mentioned Klaus Mertens once. He was shot down 2 weeks before you started flying with Hartmann, and Erich looked at me blankly. No recognition. Like the boy had never existed. That night, you lie awake thinking about the implications. 36 young pilots, each assigned to fly with Germany's most successful ace, each believing they would learn invaluable combat skills, each discovering too late that they were expendable components in a killing machine that operated without regard for human cost, and you realized that your survival wasn't due to superior skill or luck. You survived because you learned faster than the others that the only way to stay alive around Hartmann was to accept your complete tactical irrelevance and focus entirely on self-preservation. But even that realization brings no comfort, because it raises a disturbing question. If you had continued flying with him, if your injuries hadn't ended your combat career, would you have eventually become like him? Would the constant exposure to his methods have gradually eroded your humanity until you, too, began viewing other pilots as expendable tactical assets? The thought terrifies you more than any enemy fighter ever did. During your 3rd week in the hospital, you receive an unexpected visitor, Oberst, Colonel Johannes Steinhoff, one of the Luftwaffe's most respected fighter commanders and a veteran pilot with over 150 victories himself. Unlike Hartmann, Steinhoff has a reputation for caring about his pilots' welfare and maintaining unit cohesion even under the most difficult tactical circumstances. "I understand you flew with Hartmann," he says without preamble, taking a seat beside your hospital bed. His tone is professionally neutral, but there's something in his expression that suggests this isn't a casual visit. "Yes, sir. Until my aircraft was shot down." Steinhoff nods, consulting a folder of documents. "I've been reviewing pilot assignments and loss rates across different squadrons. There are some interesting patterns emerging." He shows you a statistical analysis that makes your blood run cold. Squadrons led by most veteran pilots show wingman survival rates between 70 and 80% over 6-month periods. Pilots flying with Hartmann show survival rates below 40% over the same time frame. "This is why I'm here," Steinhoff explains. High Command is beginning to ask questions about these statistics. Some people are suggesting that Hartmann's tactical methods, while effective at producing kills, may be counterproductive from a broader strategic perspective. What do you mean? Every experienced pilot we lose has to be replaced by someone fresh from training school. Those replacement pilots need time to develop combat skills, during which they're even more vulnerable than usual. If an ace like Hartmann is consuming wingmen faster than we can train replacements, then his net contribution to the war effort becomes questionable. The colonel's analysis is coldly logical, but it misses the emotional reality you've experienced firsthand. It's not just that Hartmann's methods are wasteful of human resources, it's that those methods reflect a fundamental disconnection from normal human empathy. "Sir, I think the problem goes deeper than tactical doctrine," you say carefully. "I think Hartmann has become something that isn't quite human anymore." Steinhoff studies you intently. "Explain." You choose your words carefully, aware that you're essentially accusing Germany's most successful ace of psychological abnormality. But the weeks in the hospital have given you time to process what you experienced, and you've reached conclusions that need to be shared. He doesn't see other pilots as people, sir. We're tactical assets, nothing more. When I was shot down, he circled the crash site for a few minutes, then flew away without attempting rescue or calling for medical support. Not because he was cowardly, but because a damaged asset isn't worth the risk of additional resources. That sounds like cold tactical thinking, but not necessarily wrong. But it wasn't an isolated incident, sir. I've talked to other pilots who flew with him, and the pattern is consistent. He forms no personal relationships, shows no interest in his wingmen's welfare beyond their immediate tactical utility, and seems incapable of the kind of unit cohesion that makes most squadrons effective. Steinhoff makes notes as you speak, his expression growing increasingly troubled. There's something else, you continue. He keeps a private logbook where he records details about every pilot he's killed. Not just aircraft types and tactical circumstances, but personal observations about their flying styles, their decision-making patterns, their final moments. It's like he's studying human behavior for the specific purpose of killing more efficiently. The colonel stops writing and looks at you directly. You've seen this logbook? Yes, sir. He was reviewing it one evening in the mess hall. When I asked about it, he explained that he records everything about his victories, including details about the enemy pilot's last actions before being shot down. That's... Steinhoff pauses, clearly struggling with the implications. That's not normal combat intelligence gathering. That sounds like someone who takes personal pleasure in the killing itself. The conversation continues for another hour, covering tactical doctrine, pilot training, and resource allocation. But the underlying theme remains consistent. Erich Hartmann's methods, while spectacularly successful in terms of individual kill counts, may be fundamentally incompatible with effective military organization. When Steinhoff finally leaves, he makes a comment that stays with you long after the war ends. The perfect killing machine isn't necessarily the perfect soldier. Sometimes the most dangerous enemy of good military discipline is the man who's too successful at killing. But as you're about to discover, questioning Erich Hartmann's methods brings its own dangers, because the perfect predator doesn't tolerate threats to his hunting territory. 2 days after Steinhoff's visit, you receive another unexpected caller, Erich Hartmann himself. He enters the hospital ward quietly, wearing a crisp uniform with the Knight's Cross prominent at his throat. Other patients and medical staff turn to stare. His reputation precedes him wherever he goes, but his attention is focused entirely on you. I understand you've been having interesting conversations, he says without preamble, taking the same chair Steinhoff had occupied. His tone is conversational, but there's something underneath that makes your pulse quicken. Sir, Colonel Steinhoff visited you. I'm curious about what you discussed. The directness of the question catches you off guard. In the past, Hartmann's communication style had been limited to tactical instructions and mission briefings. This level of personal interest is unprecedented. He asked about wingman survival rates, sir. Statistical analysis of different squadron performance. Hartmann nods, studying your face with those pale blue eyes that seem to catalog every micro-expression. And what did you tell him? This is the moment where you have to choose, honesty or diplomacy. The safe response would be to minimize your comments, to avoid any suggestion that you criticized his methods. But something in his demeanor suggests he already knows exactly what you said. I told him the truth, sir. That flying with you requires different survival strategies than flying with other pilots. Different how? Most aces work to keep their wingmen alive because they recognize the tactical value of experienced pilots. You focus on maximizing kill opportunities, which sometimes conflicts with wingman survival. Hartmann is quiet for a long moment, processing your words with the same methodical attention he brings to combat situations. When he speaks again, his voice carries a tone you've never heard from him, something almost like curiosity. Do you think that makes me a bad pilot? The question is so unexpected that you hesitate before answering. This isn't the Hartmann you flew with, the cold, calculating predator who treated wingmen as expendable tactical assets. This seems almost like a genuine request for personal feedback. No, sir. I think it makes you exactly what you were designed to be, the most efficient killing machine in the history of aerial warfare. But I also think it makes you someone that other pilots can't safely fly with for extended periods. Interesting. He stands up, straightening his uniform jacket. I came here to determine whether you represented a threat to my continued effectiveness. I'm satisfied that you don't. Sir. Your analysis is accurate but irrelevant. The war isn't going to be won by keeping wingmen alive, it's going to be won by killing enough enemy aircraft to break their will to fight. My methods serve that purpose more effectively than anyone else's. He pauses at the foot of your hospital bed, and for a moment you see something in his expression that might be regret. Or possibly relief. I'm sorry you were injured, he says quietly. But I'm not sorry about the choices I made that led to your injuries. Given the same tactical situation, I would make the same decisions again. After he leaves, you lie in the darkened ward thinking about the conversation. What disturbs you most isn't his lack of remorse, you'd expected that. What disturbs you is the fleeting moment when he seemed almost human, when you glimpsed the person he might have been before the war transformed him into something else, but that moment of humanity makes his transformation even more chilling. He wasn't born a killer, he was made into one. And the process that created Erich Hartmann could theoretically happen to anyone who spent enough time in his environment, including you. That night, you dream about flying again. But in your dream, you're not the wingman anymore. You're in the lead position, and there's a younger pilot flying beside you, watching you with the same mixture of fear and admiration you once felt for Hartmann. In the dream, you shoot down enemy aircraft with methodical precision, calculating angles and probabilities while your wingman struggles to keep up. When he's hit by enemy fire, you circle his crash site for exactly 90 seconds before flying away to hunt other targets. You wake up in a cold sweat, understanding with perfect clarity why you wouldn't survive flying with Erich Hartmann. Not because he would get you killed, but because he would teach you to become someone who could watch other people die without feeling anything at all, and that lesson, once learned, can never be unlearned. During your final weeks in the hospital, you begin to understand the broader implications of what you've experienced. Erich Hartmann isn't just an individual pilot with unusual methods. He represents a fundamental problem with how modern warfare shapes human psychology. The efficiency of industrial killing requires people to disconnect from normal human emotions. Compassion, empathy, moral hesitation, these become tactical disadvantages that must be eliminated to maximize battlefield effectiveness. The process that created Hartmann is the same process that's transforming millions of soldiers across Europe into something less than human. Your conversations with other recovering aircrew confirm this pattern. Bomber pilots describe learning to ignore the fires they start in enemy cities. Tank commanders talk about the mechanical process of destroying enemy positions without thinking about the crews inside. Infantry soldiers develop an emotional numbness that allows them to kill without hesitation, but Hartmann represents the logical endpoint of this transformation, someone who has become so efficient at killing that he's lost the ability to form meaningful human connections at all. A young pilot named Stefan Muller, recovering from burns suffered during a crash landing, shares a story that illustrates this perfectly. I was assigned to fly with Hartmann for 2 weeks last month, he explains. During that time, I watched him shoot down 9 enemy aircraft. Not once did he express any emotion about the kills, no satisfaction, no regret, nothing. He recorded the details in his logbook and moved on to the next target. But the really disturbing part came during our final mission. We were attacking a formation of Soviet ground attack aircraft when I saw one of the enemy pilots bail out. His parachute was damaged. It was obvious he was going to die when he hit the ground. I pointed this out to Hartmann, thinking he might show some reaction to the man's fate. Stefan pauses, adjusting his bandages with shaking hands. Hartmann's response was to calculate how long it would take for the pilot to hit the ground, then position himself to attack the next aircraft in the formation at exactly that moment. He used another human being's death as a timing reference for his next kill. The story crystallizes everything you've learned about Hartmann's psychology. He hasn't just become efficient at killing, he's developed the ability to use human suffering as a tactical tool. But what terrifies you most is recognizing similar patterns in your own thinking. During your weeks flying with him, you'd gradually stopped seeing enemy pilots as people and started viewing them as problems to be solved. You'd learned to calculate survival probabilities, to evaluate tactical situations without emotional interference, to make decisions based purely on mathematical advantages. The process was subtle but progressive. Each mission required you to become a little less human in order to function effectively. And if your injuries hadn't ended your flying career, you might have eventually completed the same transformation that turned Hartmann into a perfect killer. This is why you wouldn't survive flying with Erich Hartmann, not because the experience would kill your body, but because it would kill your soul. And once that transformation is complete, survival becomes meaningless because the person who survives is no longer recognizably you. The final entry in your mental catalog of Hartmann's wingman comes from an unexpected source, a Soviet pilot named Viktor Petrov, captured after being shot down and now recovering from injuries in the same hospital where you're being treated. Through careful conversations, conducted when German guards aren't listening, you learn that Petrov has encountered Hartmann in combat multiple times. His perspective provides the missing piece in your understanding of why Hartmann's methods are so devastatingly effective. Your ace, Petrov says in broken German, he is not like other German pilots. Most of your flyers, they attack when they see opportunity. They make mistakes because they think like humans, they get angry, they get excited, they get afraid. But this Hartmann, he thinks like machine. He studies us for weeks before attacking. He knows which pilots will turn left, which will climb, which will dive. He kills us because he understands our psychology better than we understand it ourselves. Petrov's analysis confirms your own observations, but from the enemy's perspective. Hartmann's success isn't just due to superior flying skills or better aircraft, it's due to his systematic study of human behavior patterns that allows him to predict and exploit enemy reactions. How many times have you faced him, you ask? 4 times. First 3 times, I escape because I am careful, because I follow training procedures. 4th time, he shoots me down because he has learned my patterns. He knows that when I am threatened, I will always turn right and climb. So he positions himself to intercept that maneuver. The conversation reveals something chilling. Hartmann doesn't just hunt individual pilots, he studies and learns from each encounter, building a database of human behavioral patterns that makes him increasingly deadly over time. Your pilot friends, Petrov continues, the ones who fly with him. They do not know they are training him to kill their own countrymen. Every mission, he watches how they react to threat, how they make decisions under pressure. He learns German pilot behavior just as he learned Soviet pilot behavior. The implication hits you like a physical blow. Hartmann's wingmen aren't just expendable tactical assets, they're unwitting research subjects in his ongoing study of how to kill pilots more efficiently. Every flight you took with him provided data that he could use to shoot down other German pilots if circumstances required it. This is the final, most disturbing piece of the puzzle. Erich Hartmann has transcended normal human loyalties. He serves Germany not out of patriotism but because the war provides him with unlimited opportunities to perfect his killing methods. If the tactical situation changed, if different targets became available, he would adapt his techniques without moral hesitation. You wouldn't survive flying with Erich Hartmann because he views everyone, enemy, ally, wingman, commander, as subjects for behavioral study. And once he's learned enough about your patterns, your psychological responses, your tactical tendencies, you become either a tool to be used or a problem to be eliminated. The war will end eventually. Germany will lose, Hartmann will become a prisoner, and the killing will stop. But the techniques he's developed, the systematic approach to human predation, will survive. And somewhere, sometime, someone else will learn those techniques and apply them in new contexts. That possibility terrifies you more than any enemy fighter ever did. As autumn turns to winter and your physical injuries heal, you prepare for discharge from the hospital and reassignment to non-flying duties. Your recovery has been remarkable, the doctors are pleased with your progress, and your broken ribs have knitted properly despite their initial concerns, but the psychological recovery is more complex. You've processed your experiences flying with Hartmann, analyzed the patterns you observed, and reached conclusions that will haunt you for the rest of your life. Yet you've also gained something valuable, a complete understanding of why normal human beings can't function effectively in his presence. Your final weeks in the hospital are interrupted by news from the Eastern Front. Hartmann's kill count has continued climbing with mathematical precision, 200 victories, 250, approaching 300. Each milestone is celebrated in the German press as evidence of Luftwaffe superiority, but you know the human cost behind those statistics. Intelligence reports filtering through hospital staff reveal that Soviet pilots have begun developing specific tactics to counter Hartmann's methods. They fly in larger formations, maintain strict radio discipline, and rotate squadron assignments to prevent him from studying individual pilot patterns, but these adaptations only seem to challenge him to develop new hunting techniques. Reports from the front describe increasingly complex attacks where Hartmann uses psychological warfare, false retreats, and elaborate deception tactics to lure enemy formations into vulnerable positions. He's evolving, becoming more sophisticated in his predation methods. And each evolution requires wingmen who can adapt to his changing tactical requirements, wingmen who inevitably become casualties in his endless experimentation with more efficient killing techniques. Your replacement, a young pilot named George Schall, visits you briefly before shipping out to join Hartmann's squadron. He's enthusiastic, confident, and completely unprepared for what awaits him. "I've studied all of Hartmann's combat reports," Schall tells you proudly. "His tactical methods are revolutionary. I'm going to learn everything he can teach me." You want to warn him, want to explain what he's really volunteering for, but you recognize the futility of the attempt. Schall is convinced that flying with Germany's top ace will make him a better pilot. He can't comprehend that it might make him into something that's no longer recognizably human. 6 weeks later, you receive word that George Schall was killed during his third mission with Hartmann. According to the official report, his aircraft suffered engine failure during a low-altitude attack run. Unofficial sources suggest he was shot down while providing cover for one of Hartmann's hunting expeditions. The cycle continues. Another young pilot seduced by the legend, another casualty in the creation of a killing machine that operates without regard for human cost. But you also learn something that provides grim satisfaction. Several veteran pilots have begun refusing assignments as Hartmann's wingmen. Word is spreading through the Luftwaffe that flying with him is statistically equivalent to suicide. High Command is having increasing difficulty finding experienced pilots willing to take the position. The perfect predator's greatest weakness is finally becoming apparent. He's so efficient at consuming resources that he's threatening his own supply chain. And military organizations, however incompetent in other areas, are usually good at protecting their human resources from wasteful consumption. Colonel Steinhoff's investigation has apparently reached higher levels of command. There are rumors of reassignments, of policy changes, of new doctrines that emphasize wingman survival over individual kill counts, but it may be too late. The techniques Hartmann has developed, the systematic approach to human predation, have been observed and learned by other pilots. His methods are spreading through the Luftwaffe like a virus, transforming a generation of fighter pilots into something that resembles him, and that transformation may be irreversible. Because once you've learned to view other human beings as tactical problems to be solved rather than people to be protected, once you've developed the emotional detachment necessary for efficient killing, once you've crossed that invisible line that separates normal people from predators, there's no path back to normal human psychology. This is why you wouldn't survive flying with Erich Hartmann, because the experience changes you in ways that make survival meaningless. You might live through the missions, but the person who survives wouldn't be recognizably you. And in a world where that kind of transformation is becoming commonplace, where efficiency in killing is valued above human connection, where survival requires sacrificing everything that makes life worth living, in that world, the real victory might be choosing not to survive at all. But you made a different choice. You chose to retain your humanity even when it meant accepting vulnerability. You chose to remain a person instead of becoming a weapon. And that choice, more than any tactical decision or combat skill, is what allowed you to come home from the war with your soul intact. The morning after your discharge from the hospital, as you walk through the quiet streets of a German city slowly adapting to the reality of impending defeat, you understand the final lesson Erich Hartmann taught you. The most important battles aren't fought against enemy forces. They're fought against the parts of yourself that whisper you can become invincible by abandoning everything human, and the greatest victory isn't defeating your enemies, it's remaining yourself despite every pressure to become something else. You survived flying with Erich Hartmann not because you were a better pilot, but because you recognized that some prices are too high to pay, even for survival itself. And as the war stumbles toward its inevitable conclusion, as Germany's cities burn and its armies retreat, as the dreams of empire crumble into rubble and ash, you know that you made the right choice. You remained human, and that's why, in the end, you're the one who truly won. The gentle sounds of evening drift through hospital windows across Europe tonight, carrying with them the promise that even the darkest chapters eventually end. Rest now, knowing that the most important victories are often the quietest ones, the moments when we choose to remain ourselves rather than becoming something we couldn't live with afterward. Tomorrow the sun will rise on a world where the engines of war finally fall silent. And in that silence, Those who retain their humanity will be the ones who truly know how to live in peace. Sleep well. You've earned it.